Good afternoon. Ryan, are we all set? Good afternoon. I'm Howard Graham. I'm Associate Director for Academic Programs in the Office of First Year Experience, and I direct the KU Common Book Program. And thank you for coming today to Create Dangerously, a panel, of creative artists. What I want to do is give a little bit of context about the KU Common Book Program before I turn it over on paper here at the Spencer Museum of Art, and then our four panelists. So we are in our 7th year with KU Common Book. I did it earlier, but I'm afraid I would fail now, so I'm not going to recite all 7. But recent choices have included Between the World and Me by Ta-Nehisi Coates, Citizen by Claudine Rankin, and also this year's book, Create Dangerously, The Immigrant Artist at Work by Edwidge, Danticat. And we have always worked in partnership, the Office of First Year Experience and Undergraduate Studies, with different campus partners and units to create programming that allows multiple pathways and entries into a book. And the Spencer Museum of Art, with its Common Work of Art program, which Kate's going to talk a little bit more about, is really part of the backbone of who we are and what we are as a program. We have always had an event here in the museum in the springtime, spring semester, that frames one of our keynote events in the spring semester, and that's what this event today, this panel today, is part of. So again, I want to thank you for coming. I want to thank our panelists for being here. We're going to give them an opportunity to introduce themselves, but I now want to turn it over to Kate Meyer, who will talk a little bit about the Common Work of Art program.
Hi there. So, as there is a common book, so too there is a common work of art, and we choose a work of art that relates to themes presented in the book, whatever the book may be, because it's one of the tenets of the Spencer Museum of Art that art relates to the larger world, and that has always been an easy pairing for whatever the common book may be. We'll be looking forward to learning what next year's common book will be within, a couple of weeks. So that'll be exciting. This year's Common Work of Art is actually on view upstairs. I am pointing through architecture toward its exact location upstairs. It's a painting by Ulrick Jean-Pierre, which was featured in an exhibition that could not be more well suited to the Common Book. It was very fortuitous. That's why we put the Art Museum on planning committees. The exhibition was The Ties That Bind, Haiti, the United States, and the Art of Ulrick Jean-Pierre in Comparative Perspective. And we retained and acquired a painting from that exhibition, the Common Work of Art, so that it will always be with us. Before we get any farther, I have thanking I want to do. Got to thank my partner in crime, the Department of First Year Experience, for their continued and exuberant partnership. Partnerships go both ways. As well as thanking Jeff and Mary Weinberg and the Jadell Family Foundation, who graciously support the Spencer's programming related to the KU Common Book and Common Work of Art. So here's a bit of introduction. I want to tell you who our panelists are, tell you what we're going to do, and how we're going to do it. Our panelists are, I'm going to go from your left to your right with Christine Olynyk, who represents the Department of Visual Art, and Delima Captain, who is a student in architecture, and then Mariana Farah from the School of Music, and Caitlin Howard, who's a student in design. And what unites these individuals is that they are creative artists, and yet they represent wildly different and disparate departments and programs within our university. And I hope that programs like this help bring these different departments and entities and moments in creative careers in alignment more and more, because we hope that the Spencer is a place where things like that can happen. Each of our panelists is going to have about 8 minutes to give opening remarks in which they will introduce themselves and their creative work, and hopefully we'll flirt with exploring what creating dangerously means to them. And then after these remarks, I have some questions ready to be able to ask our panelists, but I also want to open the floor to you. And then we will also have time to chat more informally with a little reception as well. First year experience events end on time, so know everything's going to be okay. We're going to try to go till about 5 or 5:10 in here and then have reception as well. We're going to kick things off with Christine, and I'm going to be her slide advancer. So we're going to be ready to do that.
Hi, everybody. To begin with, I'd like to start by addressing how my identity affects my creative process. I identify as a working-class artist who was raised in a Polish immigrant culture in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. This description seems self-evident in my name, Christine Olynyk. My name is a big part of my identity. My grandparents were Polish immigrants who came to the US at the turn of the 20th century. Their first child, my Uncle Mike, was born in 1906, and my grandmother continued to give birth to a child every other year for 20 years. My father is the youngest child in that first generation of Americans, and I am his oldest child, one of 6. My relatives all changed their last names after World War II in an effort to assimilate and not be mistaken as communists. They changed their name to Olin. My father, named after his father, was the only one to keep his name, and I was very proud of that fact. Out of all the cousins and then cousin-in-laws and then children of those children, I saw the Olynyk name begin to be erased. Of my 5 siblings, my sister changed her name when she married, and one of my brothers changed his name. So years after my mother died, my father also changed his name to Olin to join his brothers and sisters. And I made a promise to myself when I was still in elementary school that I would never change my name, and have kept my commitment, even though there have been many awkward moments. I always include a phonetic spelling on business cards and correspondence. So I start there, with my name as an indicator, a mark that identifies me as someone with Polish descendants, as someone from the blue-collar working class of the Midwest, and as someone who knows how to work with my hands. Danticat references an interview with Basquiat about his ethnic identity. She asks him the question, so you're what, Haitian Puerto Rican? And he responds that he is genetically Haitian because he's never been there. I understand that. I've never been to Poland, but I feel the imprint on my body and the way my mind is wired. So I grew up with this immigrant culture in Milwaukee where everyone I knew that was my age had grandparents that talked funny. So when I began to look into the history of Poland and track the wars, the invasions, the ever-changing borders, until at one point the country all but disappeared, I became even more dedicated to keeping my name and not giving in to more erasure. My name felt like another border. My immigrant experience in Milwaukee also meant being part of a DIY culture. Next slide, please. A place where there was an attitude that if you couldn't afford to buy it, then make it. Things, the stuff in your life, requires either money or time, so use what you have. We were a group of people who made things, and this was not unique to my family. All the families around me growing up seemed to have the same skill set. In my father's spare time, he would assemble Heath kits, kits for hobbyists made up of surplus wartime electronic parts. Next slide, please. My father assembled an AM/FM radio, and then his Heathkit masterpiece was a 2-level organ with effect switches that simulated the sounds of banjo, trumpet, and a couple of other instruments. Next slide, please. My mother was a very accomplished seamstress and conveyed the same message to me. When I would see her laying out a Vogue pattern with what seemed like 100 pieces, I asked how she was able to put it all together. And she pointed out that no matter how many pieces there were, they all went together 2 at a time. It was a simple process with a lot of repetition and not to get overwhelmed. I could do it. I got my bachelor's degree in fine art at the University of Texas at Austin, where one of my professors, Bogdan Brzezinski, was from the same town in Poland as my grandfather. We look alike. Cowlicky brown hair, iconic glasses, a conceptual artist who schooled me my second semester of drawing. The only instructor at UT who didn't have to ask me how to say my name. When he told me it was a common name in Poland, I felt a true sense of pride and a feeling that I needed to represent. Next slide, please. The lesson he taught me that burned the deepest was when he walked past me as I was working on a piece and asked me if that was the most poetic thing I could think of. I felt my face flush, pulled out my eraser, and made sure I never put down another line that wasn't important, thoughtful, intentional. I still ask myself that question when I'm working. Really, is that the most poetic piece you can make? Next slide, please. It was in graduate school at the Art Institute of Chicago that I started the work that would occupy my thinking. One day, riding on the bus on my way to school, surrounded by noise, people talking, sirens going off, construction happening, the L passing by, radios blasting, that I decided not to block the noise, but to open up my ears and listen to everything, not to edit, to hear it all like a symphony. I worked to listen carefully and identify as many sounds as I could. I found it to be beautiful. The practice of deep listening, as Pauline Oliveras would call it, led me to pay attention to the sounds of my art making when I was alone, specifically the sound of drawing and writing, a solitary act, often done with a pencil on a wooden desk. I began to record the sound of myself drawing and started to compose with that sound. Next slide, please. I did experiments with the sound of drawing for the sake of the sound, drawing with attention to the visual image, writing cursive, printing, and then using drawings from art history as musical covers. Next. I used Malevich, Clay, Twombly, Seurat, and Gorky drawings as scores and housed them in a 4-piece drawing suitcase band, next slide, as well as books I produced that encased cassette players. Next slide. For my graduate thesis, I presented 3 drawing stereos. The pieces are modular, easy to pack up, mount with V-blocks, and completely fabricated by myself. I also did all the electronics, rerouting power switches and hooking up the small amplified speakers in the stereos. Very Heathkit inspired. Next slide, please. After graduate school, it became obvious to me that I needed to create instruments and perform this new music where I was able to work with the entire percussion section of the Salina Symphony, and over the course of 6 weeks, composed and rehearsed new pieces based on landscape drawings and field recordings in and around.
All right. I'm Caitlin Howard. I'm a third year here at KU. I am a design major, as Kate had said. I'm an illustration and animation first year student in design. So I have like 4 more years here, even though I'm a third year. But yeah, other than design, I am also the president of KU's Unity Hip Hop crew here. It's a student-based dance organization, and I love it so much, and I love the people in it and the many, many opportunities that come around with Unity. Also, I am in the KU marching band. Next year will be my senior year, my 4th year in it, and my last full year. Another thing, yeah, I just love to create. Before design, I was an art-based student, so I started out with drawing and painting before getting into design and illustration and animation. So, growing up, I'm 20 years old right now. I have 5 sisters. I am the middle child. I come from a very strong, passionate, and talented family. My parents are very supportive, and they really wish they could have been here today, actually. And somewhere along the way, I've always been a very outgoing person and was always pushing to be in dance, gymnastics, and all these other sports. And when I got to school, you know, growing up, you know how it is, like middle school, you're trying to find yourself, and I was just always so shy. But when I came back home, I would just be so emotional. Like sometimes I'll be super happy, super jumpy all over the place. But at the same time, I would have these moments where I would be so angry all of a sudden, or I would be very like deeply sad for some reason. And so I was a very emotional person, but drawing and dancing and sports was always my outlet, and I could always express myself no matter what. And dancing especially was very important to me, and that's why I'm so thankful that I can continue today with it. Dancing is very special because for me it's personal. When I was in dance, my sisters were all dancers as well, and we're not competitive or anything, but at the same time, when we were on stage, you always want to be the person in the front. And so when you're not that person and you're not the one that performs the best, it's really hard to have good self-esteem all the time and to continue doing it in the first place. So I was that person in the back, and my sisters and my cousins were always like, we're just gonna do it anyways. They were on the dance team, and I was just like, I'll just take the small dance classes, it's fine, chill in the back, do the best that I can. But when we got home, we're always freestyling, doing our own dancing, like to High School Musical, to Disney movies, shows, and musicals, anything that we could get our hands on. We would just play it over and over again, pick up their dance moves or make up our own too. So when I started doing that over and over again, it's just like, for some reason, I could always do it. And I felt so good doing it too. So that's why I feel like I kept up with dancing. But at the same time, when we're performing on a stage, I could never dance and keep my head up. Like I would dance just looking at the ground, perform as hard as I can, but I'm looking at the ground. And then I would also dance and sometimes just never go full out. Like if this was the crowd and I'm doing my own solo, I could never look you in the eye while I dance when I was younger and growing up. But today, over the years, especially coming to KU, I definitely found myself. And I think from definitely just continuing to dance, especially when I'm on my own, I was able to just grab hold of something in dance. For me, dance, like I said, is personal. It was my voice and like a huge part of my life where, a huge thing in my life where I could really express myself, and it was my voice. And so when I was able to finally step into my full self, I could perform that way too. I could look you in the eye, I could dance, and show you everything that I couldn't say on paper or in front of you, or something that a lot of people just don't care about. So I was constantly keeping things bottled up, but when I danced, I could just let it out no matter what. And that's when performing and dancing no matter what, in the dark, on my own, being able to step up for Unity Hip Hop Dance Crew, and be that person that everyone can kind of learn from as a performer, to stand up no matter what and just do you, show who you are no matter what. And so when I think of dance, I'm not only a hip hop dancer, even though that's my title right now. Whenever I am alone, I do just have these urges just to dance, and my friends, they all know. We'll be in a classroom, or we'll just be walking down the street. I'm just like, there's no music playing, but I'm just having this kind of day. I'm just like, this is my day. Like, this is my day. And so I can just do it no matter what. Or it's like, I'm so angry, like, this is my day. Like, or I'm nervous. Like, I'm just so jittery, but, I'm having a good time. I can move, I'm alive. I can express myself in a way that I can't necessarily talk about, And as you can tell, I stutter a lot, so it's great. But when I dance, it just flows. Like, it's all about my arms. I love it. I can move in any way that I want to. And it definitely took me a long time to learn that. And my sisters, I don't know if they went through the same thing, and I feel like I'm the most emotional one out of them. And I didn't realize how much I had to say until I came into myself at KU and started dancing and facing those vulnerable moments in dance. And so, yeah, I think creating dangerously for me is always, no matter what, no matter like the fear or how uncomfortable it may be to be in front of people or to create your own things, you do it no matter what. You do it with a passion. You use your heart and your soul to show yourself and show everything that you are thinking and the things that you were fighting for personally too. Telling your own story through dance, no matter what. And that's very hard to do. And so when you can do that, it's a dangerous thing. Like, you are building people up at the same time. You are having a conversation with other people as well. So being able to do that, it's beautiful. It's very beautiful, and it's uplifting. And I hope that I can always do that every single time, and that I can show others how to do that as well. It's not only just myself, just being comfortable with who I am, but we need to have conversations that are really hard to have, and dance is a way to do that. It's a way to move people and to build something even stronger than what we had before, maybe. And same thing with my other art and other things that I create. With design, I'm still learning a lot about it. But the same thing, I've always been drawing. I've always saw things in a different way that I thought no one else could see. Like, I would see the sky, and like, I love the skies, the way it touches the surface, and just the way we move through life. And so I think it's a beautiful thing, and being able to see that and to put it on paper and to show others that is amazing too. So if I can't express myself through dance, I'm always happy, and I have like a booklet or a pen with me to show what I'm feeling instead of talking about it. So definitely that's another way of creating dangerously. Always putting your heart and your soul into whatever you do. Show people something that's hard to see, something that they don't see. It's a great thing. So definitely that's how I create dangerously, and it means a lot to me, and I hope that I can always push others to do the same, and I hope that like together we can make something better for ourselves and become stronger as unity, I guess, unify and be together for whatever we do. And yeah.
Good afternoon. My name is Mariana Farah. I am the Associate Director of Choirs at the University of Kansas. So in the School of Music, the bulk of my work happens on stage. Even in terms of my teaching, the bulk of what I do happens either in the rehearsal space or on stage. I direct the KU treble choir, which is the soprano alto choir, and also the KU concert choir, which is a mixed choir. I am originally from Brazil, and I came to the United States back in 2000 to pursue my graduate studies in choral conducting. And I am from São Paulo and arrived in this really tiny place called Iowa City. I did my master's at the University of Iowa. And what was really surprising to me when I first came here was the fact that I would go to choral concerts, high school concerts, college concerts, and I would always hear this one Brazilian piece, which wasn't even a huge piece in Brazil. So it always amazed me that I would hear this piece called Salmo 150 or Psalm 150 by this Brazilian composer, Hernani Aguiar, who is from Rio de Janeiro. and living composer. And so I was always puzzled as to why we didn't hear anything else, clearly because we didn't have a whole lot published, and we still don't have a whole lot published. And when I was doing my doctorate, my advisor asked me, he said, I think there's a door that for you, don't you want to do your dissertation on Brazilian choral music? And I said, no, I really don't. I'm a classical trained musician. I like the music of the dead white European men, Beethoven, Brahms, Bach. So just because I'm from South America, I now have to do Latin American music. And he said, yes, let's do that, because there will be a door for you. And it's true. To this day, every time I go clinic in high schools or colleges, or I go give presentations, there is an expectation that I am going to do Latin American music, which, you know, it used to be a little more upsetting than it is now. Now I just, I play with it. So I want to play for you a little bit. This one recording that I'm going to play for you right now of Psalm 150 is not from KU, but all of the other recordings will be showing the work that I do with Brazilian music with our KU choirs. So part of my work, I see my work in two ways. So I'm introducing new pieces of literature that have not been published here in the US. So I'm doing a lot of editions and recordings and publishing some of the music from Latin America, especially Brazil. And also then I go around and I talk to folks about performance practice and ways that we can perform Brazilian, Latin American music, especially Brazilian choral music. So what you're gonna notice with Psalm 150, can we move forward on a bunch of slides there, even more? So go back. So the praise the Lord is, so this is Psalm 150, praise God in his sanctuary. So it's a very uplifting text. And it's a common text. We have a number of settings of Psalm 150 in the history of music. So it's also puzzling to me as to why this one became very famous. So we're going to go to the score now. And Ryan, if you can play that recording that from YouTube that I asked you to play. That's good, thank you. So, as you can see, this is a quite unique psalm of this particular text, setting of this particular text, which, as I said, is frequently set to music. But I think what placed this piece in the international scene, if you will, is the fact that it's very rhythmic, very aggressive in nature, right? And also the fact that in a very common Catholic text, if you will, you have the insertion, the text that appears more often is la la la, and that's what everybody remembers, right? This la 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 la. So this rhythmic pattern, which is part of our popular music in so many ways. Also the fact that the piece is in Latin and not in Portuguese, it makes it more accessible. So the work of in my dissertation was, I was doing work on his unaccompanied choral music and trying to introduce more pieces in Latin and in Portuguese. So that's what I'm going to show now. Ryan, if we can go to this, to the video on the slide. Now, what you're going to see, the next one. So this is our KU women's chorale, now called, treble choir. And you're gonna see that I took another piece by Aguirre that was not published called Alleluia, so text is just Alleluia. Similarities with Psalm 150 is also the rhythmic nature and the repetition in patterns. And what I'm trying to show folks here is that you can take sacred texts, Brazil being the largest Catholic country in the entire world, with a multiplicity of cultures, if you will, of peoples that we have in Brazil. We also have a lot of influence of indigenous people and African religions and rituals in Brazil. And so it is okay for us to do Catholic text in a very rhythmic and add percussion instruments with all of the African influence that we received. So this is our Bales Recital Hall, which is a hall we use pretty much for sacred music, if you will. So I decided to do the Alleluia there and added percussion. So we're gonna hear the KU Women's Choir. So we want to go to 1743, please run. Also, I always try to add movement to our singing, and in Kansas that can be a little tricky, but sometimes I get there. And then we'll go to the videos very quickly. So then the other part of my work now is to try to convince folks that it's okay to sing in Portuguese. We can do it, right? So I'm gonna play the KU treble choir singing now a piece. So we'll actually go to the DVD and we'll do a piece by the same composer, but now it's a secular piece. So we also, we took on this folk character from Brazil called Saci Pererê, is this sassy guy with just one leg, and he's a redhead who plays pranks on children, if you will. So we performed at a large conference last year, and this is a lot of Portuguese that they're doing. We're not going to hear the whole thing because we won't have time, but at least you'll get a sense of the Portuguese. Ryan, if we can fast forward just to the next track. And you can just really fast forward a ton, just so we can hear a little bit of the final Brazilian piece that we did there, also in Portuguese. So to tie to the book Create Dangerously, so this program that we did with the KU Treble Choir at a conference, I called it A Journey Through the Americas. And so we started with music from Canada, and then we did composers from the United States, and then we did Venezuela and Brazil. And so for me, I think it's, for me, the work that I do is always dangerous because it involves students and us, and us being on stage. But primarily, I think, is to not, what I tell folks here when they want to embrace music from Brazil is not to be afraid to explore. All of the addition of clapping and instruments and movement are things that I do that are not in the score. And I think as academics, and as historians, we are always trying to do things correctly and in ways that are historically informed, and sometimes I feel that we miss the point. And so when I go around talking to directors and professors, I always tell folks, you start with the score, you start with what's on paper, but then you have to be able to imagine, and you have to remind yourselves that much like the United States, Brazil is a huge country with peoples from all over the world. So even when you look at a mass text, a Catholic text, it is okay to move, it's okay to add percussion, because that's pretty much how we do it. We do in Brazil. So that's a little bit of the work that I do here.
Hello, I'm Delima Captain. I am an architecture major at KU. I'm a sophomore in the MArch program. And I guess I'll start off with how I believe creating dangerously, what I believe it means to me. In a way, I feel like creating dangerously means creating vulnerably, creating from a place of your own narrative. And even though I'm not there yet, I'm only in my second year of architecture. In architecture, I feel like a lot of times you're creating art for someone else's narrative. And so there's a lot of danger in misinterpreting that narrative of another person. And then to go back, how I got to where I got to in architecture. I guess from a young age, I was creatively inclined. I had just kind of I guess not an identity crisis, but I had a bit of not knowing where I belonged in a lot of spaces. And coming from immigrant parents, both my parents are from Africa, from Kenya, and I could never really relate to their narrative in that they grew up in the village, and yet I could never also relate to the narrative of my other peers and classmates as they grew up here. And then I always found myself in white spaces growing up in Wichita, Kansas, growing up in Goddard, Kansas. And so I had a lack of just belonging. And so in third grade, I guess, I went and I picked up a violin, and the rest is history. It was my first love, definitely, and I quickly excelled. I went on to play violin throughout middle school and high school. I got 2 Koch Cultural Trust grants, one in middle school and one in high school to play. Even though I didn't move on to play violin, I fell in love with the story that I could tell and the way that I could speak with my violin in other ways that I could get other people to empathize with my story through my playing, in a way. And then I also fell in love with, in my last year of high school, I fell in love with theater. And in theater and orchestra, they go, hand in hand, they're both on the stage. But the thing that I fell in love with theater is the individualism that you get through theater on the stage, as that each person on the stage, whether you're the lead or whether you're townsperson number 3, has a story. Whereas in orchestra, you're seen as a unit, or as a section, you're seen as violin 2, violin 1, cello, bass, etc. And the individualism that theater and music theater gave me, it just really spoke to me, in that I could tell more of a deep I could have more of a deeper connection of who the character was within me. And so then I moved on to theater, and for the next 2 years, I just dived into theater. I went on to be in headliners. I went on to perform in, I did professional theater with MTW. I did a lot of local theater in Wichita. I did Roxy's Downtown. I did many shows with the Forum Theater. And then I realized that I don't know if it was theater in general that I loved or if it was the story that I loved that it told. And I saw how the same way that theater, dance, acting tells a narrative, tells a story, tells a better story in some ways of our own lives, that architecture does the same, in that not everyone can go to the theater every day, but you can also go to, well, you go home every day, or you go to work every day, and that building itself tells a story, tells a narrative. And like I said, the same way that we can dream a better world in theater, we can also dream a better world in architecture. And I'm still figuring out how I'm gonna tell that narrative through architecture, but I mean, I'm getting there. I'm in my second year. And yeah, that's how I got there. But yeah.
So I want to ask a question that I warned you I might ask you, and then we're going to throw it open to the uncertainty of our guests. I wanted to ask, to keep in the theme of creating dangerously and think about what you've all shared so transparently and bravely, so thank you for that. Thinking about risk and thinking about danger, it can be incredibly productive. I think about the expression holding your feet to the fire. That's risk inspiring. But other kinds of risk can be really inhibiting. So I was wondering if you would speak to how risk or danger or creating dangerously can be motivating, but how it also might be inhibiting, in whichever way you'd want to speak to that.
I guess I don't know if creating dangerously could be, I don't know, maybe inhibiting, because I just feel like all expressions of art are valid in their own way. But I guess creating not from a place of vulnerability, or creating kind of like an architecture where there's kind of like the copy and pasted buildings all around. That's not from a place of like individualism, that's from a place of like, we are a unit, we're not individuals, we are just a blank slated kind of, I don't know, humanity, which we're all individuals. And so yeah, I feel like that should be expressed in all types of art forms, our individuality, and when it's not, that's dangerous.
Yeah, I think that a risk for the kind of work that I do as a performer is necessary, or at least for me personally, especially because I remember when I interviewed for my position here at KU for the phone interview, it was a very long interview, and the last question they asked me was, what was the biggest risk I had taken in my career? And I wasn't expecting that question, and the answer, it was so immediate for me. I said, I left everything I knew behind to be here. And I was told I failed that question, by the way, because they were expecting me to say, oh, I programmed this big piece, you know, or whatever. But the biggest risk I took for my career was to have left everything I knew and everything that's dear to me to be in the United States. So every day that I'm here, I feel that if I'm not taking risks when I'm creating, even if I have to fail, then I'm doing myself a disservice, because I might as well just go home and be with my parents and with my dogs, and you know, and not so. And maybe, I don't know, this is also, and that's also, it's hard to put music in academia. It's hard to put any art in the academic setting, and to really try to inspire your students to not be looking for the right answers, but to just be asking a lot of questions and be vulnerable and be willing to take risks and feel uncomfortable, especially, I think students, they need to know that if they're not feeling uncomfortable, something is wrong, I think.
I agree with that. I think when it comes to dance, with drawing and anything, when you're putting your heart and your soul into anything and everything that you do, I think you're definitely taking a risk because you're risking, well, you're showing yourself in the first place. You're showing yourself the best parts of yourself, even the worst parts of yourself. And it's very powerful. It can be very beautiful and very powerful and uplifting. And I think when you're doing it in front of people or doing it with others, you have this chance to bring people up. You have the chance to save lives, to motivate people to do something else, to change their life, or for the better or for the worst, honestly, if you're showing yourself fully. And it's very risky because the power that comes from showing yourself and putting your heart and your soul into what you are doing. And I think from doing that, like I said, if you have multiple people as well, you could start a movement. Like you can do amazing things with that. And it's risky because you don't know what's gonna happen. It's uncomfortable. New things come from it, and new things are scary, and it scares people, it's off-putting, but at the same time, if we allow ourselves to keep doing it, even though it's risky, we have this chance to change for the better as well. So I think that's definitely an amazing thing that you hold on to no matter the risk it is. You put your heart and your soul, you be a beast no matter what to change, I think, so.
I think for me, the riskiest thing I did was as a visual artist. I mean, for years I was able to make work, put it up on the wall, and then I could step away from it, and I could just blend into the crowd at an opening. If I didn't announce myself, you wouldn't know that that was me. And so when I decided to perform the work, the work made me do it. I mean, at that point, in 1994, when I did my first performance, I'd never sang out loud in front of anyone. I mean, I never even sang happy birthday. I used to mouth the words, when people are around, or danced in front of anyone. And the work required me to do it. And so I just stepped up. It just seemed like I had to perform it. And I was surprised at how confident I was about my drawing. I mean, I still couldn't dance in front of anyone, but if you asked me to draw in front of you, I could do that at Shea Stadium. I mean, I was like ready to do that. And now I've been living in Marfa the last 18 years, and my husband works for a writer's residency program, and I've come in contact with a lot of really wonderful poets. And in particular, Anne Waldman is a force to be reckoned with, and I had the pleasure of not only seeing, hearing, experiencing her performance and readings, but to spend time with her. And at a time in my art where I'm feeling now like I can't just rely on poetic abstraction to say what I need. I have to find my words. And now I'm working on, really putting together narratives and telling my story, being much more transparent, and that's made me extremely uncomfortable and risky, and yet I feel that's where the work has to go. And so I'm just going to keep being uncomfortable in front of everyone, so.
I ended up, with your responses, I feel like there's another prompt that you have in common, and that is working collaboratively. And I was wondering if you would care to speak to the perils, but also the rewards of putting your trust in a group.
It's easier to pass it this way. Well, working with a group, one thing about collaborations is you have to give up some of the product. It never turns out like you think it is. because this little dance you're doing is, you know, you just don't know. And so to sort of lose control of the work a bit, to set some parameters and then just let it happen, you know, as best you can. And so that's been interesting, and I love that process because it's always a surprise what the piece is going to be. You know, no matter how much you've sort of choreographed it or scored it, there's always something that happens that's an element of surprise, and I really enjoy that.
Well, with working together, most of, here, I'll relate it to architecture. I guess I've done one project with a group of people, and it was also very difficult with having to give up a lot of your control and a lot of to compromise was a lot of the difficulty. And, but then you come to the end of the project and I don't know, it feels good knowing that you all came together collectively and created this idea, and you all fully empathize with this project, and you all fully acknowledge this project, and I don't know, can get an emotional response from other people as a group and as that unit. But yeah.
Yeah, I think about that question all the time because I'm a choir director, and I always look at my colleague who plays the flute, and I'm like, why didn't I just pick the flute? You know, if she goes play somewhere, she can bring her own instrument. She can practice at 10 p.m., midnight, you know, and so I cannot rely on my talent alone. I have to rely on students showing up and being ready and learning, and so we live in a space of uncertainty all the time. We have to be okay with it.
That's so funny, I play the flute. Okay. But yeah, I think working with others, it can be very difficult. With the Unity dance crew, you have people from all over, different age groups, you know, starting at 18 or maybe even younger coming in. So as the leader of the group, when we're all working together on our own piece, trying to come up with our own dance, it can be very difficult because people are still finding themselves. So they're not willing yet to fully put themselves out there or even to speak up, to show who they are or to put their own thing into it or to what we're trying to create together. They don't want to show their story yet, and so that's what's so hard about it sometimes. But when we do get there, when I finally push them hard enough to step out of their comfort zone, and they feel okay or good enough to experience something new together as a group, great things start happening. Like you will, once we finish that piece, you have a piece of everyone in that entire dance. So when we go out there and perform it together, we're more unified as a group, we know each other better, and we're able to perform it in a better way as well. And you're able to speak to a different person every single time because everyone has gone through something different. So definitely working together as a group can bring out the best and can push you to do new things, and it's crazy how that all works out. It's an amazing thing once it happens and people are actually showing themselves and being vulnerable with it.
I'm wondering if any of you have a question, and I bring the mic to you so that you can be heard. Okay, Selka has a question, great.
I think, is it Caitlin? Okay, you started to allude to this and kind of prompted my question. Who are you creating for? Who are you creating dangerously for, or why?
Wow. Wow. Who am I creating for? I think it's for anyone who hasn't yet found themselves, I guess. I think definitely when I was growing up, like I said, I was really shy, and I figured out that I had a lot to say and was honestly pretty lost at some times, like at some point, and really hurting pretty badly. And so by always dancing I definitely felt better. When I start to create, I think most of the time it is probably for me self-healing, maybe finding a purpose for things, or like trying to figure things out in my head through movements almost. And when I do perform or I create something for other people, I think it's definitely just stepping outside of my own headspace. Definitely trying to find almost like a vibe in the room, like how is everyone else feeling? Like, okay, maybe I'll perform it in this way so that they really feel it this time when I go out there and perform. And then in hopes of doing that, I'll help somebody out, like maybe help them the way that I was struggling. Like maybe they're going through the same thing that I was going through in the past, or even sometimes it's just like a feel-good thing. I just want you to be happy. Like when I go up there, I want to make you smile. I want to make you move with me in your chair. Like I want you to feel better once you leave the room and after seeing us perform. So that's what, that's what I think, yeah.
I feel like everybody should take a stab at that one. Who do you create for?
So I feel a huge sense of responsibility to the composers that I perform, right? So if I have an opportunity to work with them, then, you know, we're working collaboratively. And for me, with the new pieces that I introduce, it's also, again, a sense of responsibility in terms of, you know, letting folks know that the music is available, how it can be done, how it can be performed. So for me, I always tell the students, I have a responsibility towards the students, obviously, but I tell them that we all need to honor the composers and the music that we are embracing.
I probably for myself mostly. I also have that same like responsibility. That's a really good word, of being like a mediator between being that my parents are from Africa and I'm from here, and there was something in the book about how she felt responsible for representing the people from Haiti in the right way, and for other people empathizing with them in that same way. And I also have that, and how, what did she say? She said something about how the people there didn't have the opportunity to use art to express that, and so her using writing to express that was her way of having other people empathize with that story. And I feel like I very much do that in art, in that my parents and family in the village, they didn't have that same opportunity to use art and music and dance and theater to express their story. So I have to be that kind of mediator between the two worlds, if that might be, but yeah.
You know, I think I feel a responsibility to represent, you know, in many ways. And so, you know, I'm aware of my working class background, and so I always make sure everything's well crafted, but I don't want people to think that just because you came from a blue collar family, you can't be a conceptual artist and dedicate a life to an idea-based kind of work. And so, you know, I think about that representation, but then as far as my audience, I'm really striving for as big an audience as possible. I mean, my work has been described as John Cage with a beat, which I really like, you know, that it's, there's this conceptual thing, but you could dance to it. I make it the length of a pop song, and I want this to be something that's not just like trancy, heady things that take 20 minutes for you to get. Like, I come from a much more punk rock based background, so when I yell out 1, 2, 3, 4 to my band, that's like ready, set, go. And in 3 to 5 minutes, we're gonna do something else. And so, you know, I like to drive it like that so that I've got, you know, I've got a wider audience, and not just an audience that's blue-collar based or real heady academic work. You know, I'm trying to kind of bridge that gap with something that's more accessible.
Are there any other questions out here?
Maybe
Maybe an observation, but I'm also really curious because I think you're the one who spoke about the demands of the work itself, kind of calling you as an individual to do things that you were maybe originally uncomfortable. So I may be drawing a false dichotomy here, but the content of the work as it relates to your identity in conflict sometimes with the art form or is there ever a feeling of those clashing?
Very much so, and sometimes I think that, especially since I'm in the Indian summer of my life, that I may be the best art piece I ever made. That it becomes this cumulative sort of embedded energy that's in me, and as I'm driven more and more to be the performer and put myself out, even in spite of the discomfort, that's where the work is taking me. And so I just surrender to that.
Yes. Are you saying like in how just place and identity, how they clash?
Well, maybe architecture and the self.
Okay, architecture and self. I don't know. I feel like I find myself through, even though architecture is just like a recent discipline, I find a lot of myself coming out in architecture. And I feel like they're one and the same thing. A lot of the things I create, I find myself in my art. So it's kind of like an ebb and flow of both. Like sometimes I create something and I'm like, where did that come from? But then maybe like, I don't know, like 3 months from now I look back to that thing and I'm like, oh yes, that's a memory from this event that happened or something like that. But I feel like they're kind of one and the same, and it's just kind of a communication between yourself and your own art. So yeah.
Yeah, I think for me it's like the identity piece is puzzling sometimes because when I came here as an adult already, and my whole life I wasn't Brazilian, there wasn't a stereotypical way of being, and I wasn't a person of color. I always saw myself as being white. And the first time I learned that I wasn't white was because a secretary in Iowa erased the fact that I marked myself as white, and she's like, you're not white. And and then having to assume, like being here and having to assume this identity and then become an expert or, on all things Brazilian, it gets to be a little, at times it made me not want to do Brazilian music at all. So sometimes I really need to distance myself from it too. So there's the conflict there for me.
I think with me, with dance, I think about my own feelings at the same time, but also how do I want people to feel? How do I want people to walk? What do I want them to walk away with? And I think a lot of things with that start to clash sometimes when I want to just like create something, just like, oh, let's start right now. I can't do it. I'm just like, I overthink. And I'm also a very emotional person, so I'm probably like have anxiety at the time, or I'm feeling a certain way in that moment. And so it's like, okay, let me try to sort my own feelings out. And that's what's so hard for me. It's like, okay, I'm gonna have to do a completely different dance for a second, because like if I went out there and showed people that one, it's like, that's not what they wanna see almost. So definitely it's just like, I don't know, finding a way to compromise all those things to where it's not, like your purpose is not getting lost, but you're still able to showcase the emotion and the good things about dance in a way, and still push people to do the same thing as well. Like, because you want to be able, like when I'm teaching it too, and teaching it to the other dancers in Unity, you want them to be able to pick it up as well. It's like, if they saw it, it's like, oh, why did you do that? Like, wait, can we maybe change that? It's like, but wait, you didn't feel what I feel? Like, so it's like a lot of those things kind of clash. And so you just have to find a way to, I don't know, live in the moment, I guess. Hopefully that works.
I feel like our panelists have more in common than I had even hoped for, which I hope we hope for everything, but you've largely not met each other before today. And so I want to switch gears from formal to informal so that we have time to just chat with one another now. You'll indulge me in that. So I want to thank our panelists for sharing so much of their identity and their practice with us. I think that's a scary thing to do, and so I really appreciate your candor, so thank you. And then I want to, of course, thank all of you for your attendance and participation, which is going to be continued as we adjourn to have a little reception together. Thanks.